here. I'm just killing some time, letting people sign in so they don't miss anything.
You're good.
Okay, Colorado, shout out to Misty. I like this. So we got Colorado, South Carolina, and we got France, North Carolina.
California.
Okay.
Chris on from California. I don't see him.
We'll give him a minute. So, well, I hope I brought something too good to you guys tonight. So, you know, Lacey came out at me a couple, I think it was maybe about a month ago, and asked me if I would put together something. So I said, yeah, sure. Let me think about that for a little bit. And so I did. So I kind of kicked back, trying to figure out, you know, what exactly it was that I was going to do. And so the better part of me, my wife, that would be, I started bouncing off her. She goes, well, you should do something, you know, that talks about the culture of all of this stuff. And I'm like, sounds like a good idea. So, you know, we began to look at things from an anthropological perspective that deals with, I wake up to that every morning, everybody. So we want I promised I was going to keep a straight face. Nope, didn't work. Nope. So we're going to look at some you know, some cultural implications when it comes to Halloween, right? So why do we celebrate Halloween? That's the first thing that we're going to kind of talk about. So one of the litmuses to me putting this together, right? So we're going to look at vampirism, we're going to look at zombieism, and I'm talking about the real life stuff. So we're going to blend in some historical stuff, its influences on, you know, modern pulp culture. There are actually some biological references that we're going to go into here, where we have instances of, say, zombieism, right? So we're going to look at especially the Haitian mythology. I don't even think it's a mythology, the practice of zombies. We're going to look at vampirism too. So there is actually a medical diagnosis for vampirism, if you would believe that. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, those things. We're going to talk about I really just hope it's a lot of interesting stuff that everybody is going to be able to relate to. So I did bring with me, if you will, let me move this out of the way here. So I did bring with me, you know, like I said, different types of visuals to try to stimulate you guys a little bit, right? I'm very much aware of the fact that, you know, just listening to me drone on and on, well, you do have the nice, you know, imaginative aspect to it here, but so I'm going to talk about a couple other things. But anyway, so it's Halloween and it's spooky, and, you know, really soon we're going to, you know, if it wasn't for this COVID stuff that's going on, maybe still with the COVID stuff going on, depending on where you're at, you know, kids are going to dress up in, you know, sheets, or they're going to put a mask on, or, you know, you get to see my wife back there. You know, so why do we do that? You know, that's a question. Where did this tradition come from? If I can adjust this a little bit so that glare gets off my glasses. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you too. So when I was going through all of this, okay, I'm a self-professed nerd. I'm going to let you all know that right now. Those of you who heard me speak before know that I like to root things in science. And so that's what I've done here, is I've tried to root this in science. The litmus, that's what I was talking about before she walked behind me. There's a litmus is, if I explain things to my wife and I see her eyes roll in the back of her head, I don't talk about it to you guys, because if I bore her to death, I'm going to bore you guys to death, so I didn't want to do that. So anyway, what I wanted to begin with, all right, I just wanted to talk a moment about global culture, all right? And when we're talking about global culture, I'm talking about religion at its very onset, okay? And so what we see, you know, regardless, civilizations past, civilizations present, people that we can relate or understand, or people that we can't, what are the main common things that we have amongst all populations is there's some form of religious inclination, right? Now, in today's world, I understand that, You know, there seems to be a movement towards agnosticism, spiritualism, you know, and that's great too, because that all falls into part of this. But to understand this stuff, let me turn the clock back about 2,000 years, all right? Well, actually, it would be less than that. About 1,700 years, which is when the Judeo-Christian belief system really became organized. So about 300 years after the death of Christ, maybe 400 years after the death of Christ, we began to see, you know, the forceful expansion, if you will, of the Christian religion. And part of that was, you know, when new cultures were discovered by the church, if one will. So, you know, the church would try to include some of the indigenous or local belief systems and align it with Christianity, okay, and the tenets of Christianity, the major holidays. And so I'm going to talk really about the pagans to begin with, because if we're familiar with the birth of Christianity, it was in the Middle East, in present-day Iraq, right? And you know, so what we see is the influence then in Europe, Eastern Europe, North Africa, and of course the Middle East, right? And so as people moved, right, the anthropology of it is people moved and took this belief system. Other people are like, okay, well, look, they didn't say this, I'm sure, but this is me saying it, right? We want you to be a Christian, but we're not going to have you give up your very important dates, your holidays, right? And what we notice amongst a lot of the different religions is that the two solstices, right, the summer and the winter solstices, and the two equinoxes, right, the autumn and the vernal equinox, have a lot of significance to a lot of different religions that are non-Christian, non-Judeo-Christian religions, all right? And so what we see then, you know, the solstices, which I put up here, right? So we've got two of them. And really what these are just the maximum or the minimum declination of the Earth and its relationship to the sun. What is the longest day and what is the shortest day? Of course, it's going to change whether you're in the upper hemisphere or the lower hemisphere, but people didn't understand that back then. All right. So for instance, come about, you know, June 21st, 22nd, somewhere in that time frame, we had a precise axial alignment that gives us the longest day, right? And then we get the same thing with the winter, where we have that precise axial alignment that gives us the shorter day. So remember, the Earth kind of wobbles as it goes around in orbit. And so the equinoxes, which are almost equidistant on both sides of the solstices, right? So every quarter, so every 3 months, we'll either have a solstice or an equinox. And the equinoxes are marked where there is the same amount of time during the day. So the sun shines the same amount of time as the sun doesn't shine, right? So we have an equal time in the morning and equal time of night, or equal time of the day and equal time of the night. And so we get that in the fall, we get that in the spring. And if we were to sit back and look at religion then, right, we'll begin to see that there are key events that come with, say, the winter solstice, which carried a great amount of importance. We see things like Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, right? Easter falls in the time of the vernal equinox, okay, or the spring equinox. If anybody is familiar with the Bible, the Gospels, at least according to Luke, tells us that John the Baptist was born a half a year before Christ. And so then if we're looking at, you know, December 25th as being the birthday of Christ, the winter solstice, then we have to back it up 6 months, and that brings us to the summer solstice. All right. And John the Baptist, as we know, was elevated to a saint, which becomes important here very soon. So, you know, June 24th or June 25th, it's not really that much celebrated, at least to my knowledge, anymore. You know, it's not like a big Christian event. But, however, at one point in time it was. And so a lot of these events we see have some type of significance if we draw it back to the religions. So it shouldn't be any surprise then that Halloween is a blend of the same thing, right? There's a religious aspect to Halloween, and then there is some type of traditional or indigenous lore that is being practiced. And so what I'd like to go back to is which is called Samhain, right? It looks like it says Samhain up there, but Samhain is a Celtic pagan festival that welcomes the dark half of the year. And there was a lot of symbolism that was involved in Samhain. First of all, according to the Celts, it was the most significant of the 4 quarterly fire festivals. So they had one on each solstice and one on each equinox. This one would take place somewhere between, okay, the midpoint between the equinox. All right, so if we're looking at the fall equinox and the winter solstice, we have Samhain that would take place. And so the celebrants, okay, the Celtic pagans, believe that the barriers between the physical world and the spirit world begin to break down during this time frame, and it would allow more interactions, you know, with humans who are on Earth, humans who have passed on, you know, other denizens of the other worlds, you know, demons or spirits, whatever the case may be. So what they would do is they would light these huge fires. And there was so much symbolism that was involved in it where, you know, the villagers would extinguish all the fires in their homes. And then they would go to where they would have this tremendously large fire, right? And so they would light that big fire. They would wear costumes because it's Samhain now. The ghost can kind of go back and forth. And so the costumes would ward the ghosts off, right? Ancestors during this time may cross over and be able to interact with the humans. And so the Celts then would dress as animals and monsters, right? So that that fairies that were in the area, and we're not talking about two fairies, we're talking about bad fairies, would not kidnap them, okay? So it was very, very, very big in their culture. And what they would do then, as this fire would begin to die down, they would take pieces of this fire back to the hearths in their homes, and they would light those, and then that would burn throughout the winter. So they're actually taking this big ceremonial fire, they're carrying it into their home, and they're allowing it to go on. All right. So the Catholic Church recognized that in order to convert these pagans or a portion of these pagans, they're going to have to do something about this. So introduce Pope Gregory III. Now, Gregory III had the papacy for a period of 10 years, from about 730 AD to about 740 AD. And he declared at the beginning of November, November 1st, was going to be a date that would honor all the Catholic saints. All right. And so if we look up the term in English, if we look up the term hallow, it literally means to honor something as holy. Okay. And so, you know, now granted, back in the 730s, the vernacular Greek was not used yet. We were still talking all in Latin. Nothing had been transcribed into English yet. That wouldn't happen until 1611, when King James was the head of the church in England. Nonetheless, the ideology is pretty much the same. So the night before All Saints' Day, the day that everybody would honor all of the saints, was the eve of a hallow event, okay? A holy event. And so it became Hallows Eve, right? All Saints Hallows Eve, and or just the Eve of the Holy. Due to language changes due to, you know, variances in dialects over the time, eventually, you know, Hallows Eve was shortened to what we know now today as Halloween. But important at this point in time was incorporating the Celtic practices in order to draw those Celtic pagans into the Christian flock. You got to remember, if you think about it, in the early days, the church was dependent upon two things. One, it was dependent upon fear, right, in order to control the masses. And secondly, it needed tithing or giving of money to the church in order for it to, wage its wars and, expand its doctrine. So the more constituents that the church had, the greater the income that the church had. And so drawing these Celts in became a matter of doing business. And so that's what we saw. Now as the years and the centuries began, to mark time, we saw the Westward Expansion, right? Specifically, the Spanish. We're all familiar with the terms of the Spanish conquistadors, the Spanish Inquisition, right? 1492, Christopher Colon sailed to find a new world. Okay, that was because Elizabeth and Ferdinand sent him this way while they were waging wars with the Muslims to the north. I mean, you get that. So anyway, Dia de Muertos. So this is the Day of the Dead. It is a Spanish holiday, actually. Now, Dia de Muertos is the Mexican variant of the Day of the Dead. All right. In the other Spanish countries, it's called Dia de los Muertos. So we're just losing the word "the" for lack of better words, right? And this was done to draw in people from the Aztecs, Toltecs, Mayan type of religions, that were there eventually. However, this coincides also with November 1st, okay, which was the Roman Catholic Church's, All Saints Day. In Mexico, okay, so the indigenous peoples of Mexico, right, have a belief system that during certain times, and again, it happens to align, with the same practices that the Celts had, where the departed or those who were dead would have an opportunity perhaps to come back to mingle with the living for a little bit of time. And so what you'll see here, is the what I think is fantastic get up and makeup of the Dia de Muertos celebration. Now, just a quick side note here: it's a celebration, okay? Because mourning the dead is considered to be disrespectful of the dead in some of these belief systems. So. The person that is gone isn't really gone. They just transformed in some way, shape, or form. But what has been kind of persistent as far as the practice goes is that people in Mexico on this particular day, November 1st, will visit the graves of the people that they love that have passed, and they bring fantastic things with them. Okay, so you see all those yellow flowers, those yellow Mexican marigolds, or sometimes the orange Mexican marigolds. These are thought to attract the souls of the dead, and they bring food and drink and pictures and little mementos and keepsakes, so that when the departed come back, they have something to relate to. They'll also feed them. So there's a particular type of bread, pan de muerto, right, or the dead bread, which is actually like a really sweet type of roll. It's dusted with sugar, and then there's confections that are made to look like bones and skulls and whatnot. And these are decorated, and they're left there as well. So you can see how intricate these altars are. I mentioned that that Mexico kind of changed the event a little bit, right? The name of it from Dia de los Muertos to Dia de Muertos. This was to incorporate the Aztecs, like I said, the Toltecs, so on and so forth, because of their religious beliefs that mourning the dead were disrespectful. I know I kind of talked on that for just a moment. There's also many other different types of legends that are infused with culture. Now I mentioned to you already the pagans, and we discussed a little bit about the Christianity, but I mean, there are so many, and I couldn't possibly begin to bring all of those together. So I took some of the more common ones, right? Take, for instance, Greek mythology. Gods lived up in the sky. So you see Helios here, down in the bottom left corner. I gave an effigy to Helios here, and he drove, you know, according to Greek mythology, the sun from the east side of the sky to the west side of the sky. It was tethered to a chariot. We have the Egyptians, all right, and we've got, you know, Horus, which is in the bottom right there, as a falcon, which is a way that he's often portrayed. Mesopotamia, we have Anshar, which is the stone relief. We got in Rome, we got Jupiter. Okay, South American cultures, we saw Zacol, in the Aztecs, Tonatiuh. In Africa, you know, there are other types of gods like Orurun, who is very similar, if we will, to, you know, Zeus, or in the Judeo-Christian Bibles, Jehovah. And in the nearby Middle East, you know, we've got just the actual Judaic gods, the angry desert-dwelling, vengeful Jehovah in the Old Testament. And the list goes on and on and on. But the common trends that we see in a number of religions is the descent of some form of God and the return of some form of God, right? We got Jesus in Christianity. The Shawnee Indians had Tecumseh. Mayan had Kukulkan, which is in the upper right corner there. That's not actually Kukulkan, because Kukulkan's a god, but that was the reason for the elongated heads, because people wanted to be like him. Okay, also went by the name of Quetzalcoatl. And then the only difference with him, by the way, Kukulkan, is that he came from the sea and he returned to the sea. Xibalba, which is the, I guess, you know, the Mayans' version of hell, is thought to perhaps be underneath of a sea, or can be accessed through the trunk of a tree. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but the common thread to all these religions is that there is a simple acknowledgement that there is some kind of spirit world, right, in some form or shape, whether it be a heaven or a hell, you know, maybe simply another type of dimension that mortals are not capable of seeing into, right? And there's some type of belief system there, even amongst us. I mean, look at the common television shows, Ghost Hunter, for example, you know, where they make their money with these half-baked spirit boxes that, you know, make a lot of sounds, to me, unintelligible, right? But to them, somehow they're able to decipher these very distinct sentences or singing or something else, but I can't hear it. I'm sorry, it's gibberish to me. But then there's the concepts of multiverses, right? Some type of hypothetical group of universes where there are endless replicates of Earth, endless replicates of me, of you, of all living things, living distinctly different types of lives, right? Where from time to time there might be some type of crossover, you know, a glitch in the matrix. Well, okay, on the matrix, we're going to stop there. I'm not going to keep going down that road, but you know, there's just an endless pit of altered and augmented different types of realities that people trying to explain contacts with the spirit world, I guess. I'm just trying to point out that as much as it means to be a human as it is to be human, I guess it's also human to recognize that there's some type of life or some type of force that exists on the other side, right? And that's what brings me to really what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to talk about two different types of things that live on the other side that we have a fascination with. Let's start with zombies. All right, we're all familiar with zombies, and this is just a bunch of pop culture zombie stuff here that I decided I was going to pull down. If you guys look at it, you recognize The Walking Dead, you're going to recognize Game of Thrones. I had to put Bill Murray in here, right, from Zombieland, because Bill Murray as a zombie is not much different from Bill Murray as a human. All right, World War Z, right? We're familiar with these, right? And what's the common thread that we see to zombies? Is they're these mindless, autonomous to some degree creatures that just have a thirst for blood or brains. I mean, that's pretty much the common theme that we understand with it here, all right? But history shows us that the concept of zombies is not new at all. I mean, yeah, the World War Z brain-eating type of zombies are, but the zombies actually came to us from, the Congo in Africa, right? And it is derived from a indigenous word that's Nzambi, okay, which in Congolese means ghost or spirit of a dead person, or zombie, which is Creole, Louisiana Creole, Haitian Creole, that represents a person who died and then was brought back to life without any form of free will. And that concept of zombie is a little bit different. Now, you'll see up here that I've got a picture of a man named Clairvius Narcisse. All right, and so in 1980-ish, the voodoo zombies of Haiti, you know, essentially came to real life, and that pun is absolutely intended, okay? Clairvius Narcisse was a Haitian who in 1962 died, all right? Just before he died, he went to an American hospital, and according to the records, and let me let you guys know this, that when I prepared for this is not just me going and grabbing stuff off of the internet. I researched medical journals, right? Reputable medical journals, academic journals. I looked into cultural, both anthologies, ethnologies. I mean, I really dug deep into this, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get it all out to you in an hour, even an hour and a half. Just trust me that when I say I really dug deep on this stuff, I did. All right. And so his case is really good and documented. No, April 30th, 1962, he's about 18 years old. He goes to a hospital. He's coughing up blood, and he had a fever and body aches. Now, I want you to pay attention to fever and body aches because that's a recurring theme that we're going to get into here. He was treated at that hospital for 3 days, all right? And some of his doctors were Haitian doctors. Some of his doctors were American doctors that were, whether mission work or otherwise, were in Haiti at this particular time. And he was declared dead. He demonstrated what in my profession we call irreversible signs of death, okay? Some type of physiological derangement that's incompatible with life, in this case, the fever. He was placed in the morgue, and unlike what we typically do here in the States, you know, if there's a question as to how or why somebody died, we tend to do an autopsy, and that's not common practice in Haiti. So they put him on ice, okay, in the morgue for about 20 hours, all right, and apparently he's dead. He was taken to a small rural graveyard and was buried there, and there was witnesses to his death and his burial. You know, his sister Angelina was there. She saw him get buried. You know, there was other people, you know, that, you know, said that he had been dead for, you know, some time, and so on and so forth. But I do want to say, in all fairness of the story, I found a little sideline that I thought was interesting, is that, you know, Clairvius was not some type of family gem. Okay, he wasn't a family man. He wasn't well liked. All of this different types of things. According to Haitian, from what I could see, according to Haitian doctrine or beliefs, that when a father dies, the land that he owns is passed to the male heir, right? But if there is more than one male child, then the lands are equally divided amongst the children, be it 2, 10, or whatever the case may be. He was single, Clairvius, right? Now he had children, you know, many children. With, you know, just as many women that he had the children. He's very stingy with his money, and pretty much just an overall deadbeat. Okay, so let's look at Haitian culture for just a moment. People rely on each other. The family relies upon family members to pitch in and carry their own weight. You know, people in the community help the people in the community. You know, if we look at 1960 Haiti, we're talking about a rather destitute country that was impoverished, much like it is today. And, you know, community members tend to band together. It's kind of like a rural-ish, if you get it, you know, outside of the big places, Port-au-Prince and other areas, it tends to be rural. Now, his younger brother had a very large family, okay, with just one woman, or at least so it appears, which is, you know, in stark contrast to Clairvius. And so when it would appear that upon the eventual death of Clairvius's father, that he's going to inherit land and wealth, okay? But because of his previous actions, and if we look at previous behavior, oftentimes it's a good predictor of future behavior, we can understand that the community and the family were opposed to this. They didn't think it was a good fit. All right, and so this created a substantial problem of some forms, and one that somebody's death, in this case Claverius's death, might just rectify all the problems. So he was buried. Now 18 years later, okay, 1962. So 18 years later, 1980, his sister Angelina was approached by a man who said that he was in fact Claverius, and I put a little bit of information over here for you guys to see. It says, he was able to use intimate knowledge, childhood names and words, that showed that he was actually Claverius, and this kind of stunned the community. Now, here's where things begin to get curious. Claverius's 1980 account of his 1962 death, he said he was very much alert, awake, and conscious. His body was encased in some form of paralysis. Okay, he recalls not being able to really move in any way. He heard the doctor pronounce him as dead. Excuse me, my phone made a noise. I just want to make sure it's not dying. It's getting close. Let me plug it in. That's how y'all hear me. I dial in. So he was heard, he heard the doctors pronounce that he was dead. His sister, he remembers that Angelina was crying over him. He remembers getting put into the coffin. He remembers that when they sealed the coffin, as they were hammering a nail in, the nail actually, pierced in his skin and cut his cheek. He remembers the sound of the dirt being tossed down onto the box until everything became silent. And then, by some accounts, days later, a Bokor, or a witch doctor, for lack of better words, called him from the grave. And Claverius, and I'm not one for reading direct quotes or anything like this, but let me see here. He said, "They called my name 3 times. Even as they cast the dirt on my coffin, I was not there. My flesh was, but I floated, moving wherever. I could hear everything that happened. Then they came. Then they had my soul. They called me, casting it into the ground." So, he believed that he'd been in the coffin for a number of days before this witch doctor came and got him. They slapped him 3 times. The 3 means something. They made him smell something, and he was taken, back to the witch doctor's house, where he, sewed up and treated the wound that was on his face. After which he was forced to march to the northern aspect of the island, where he was placed onto a plantation and was forced into hard labor with 151 other zombies. That's a very precise number that he gave. The zombies and Claverius as well would say that they lived in like a very surreal, dreamlike state. Okay. The way that they kept them there was that there was a very large river, according to these zombies, a very large river that encircled the plantation. Later, that was shown that it was just a very small stream, right? But because of the disjointed perceptions that these zombies had, it made the river seem like it was insurmountably huge, all right? And they were also fed a salt-free diet. And the salt's curious here also. So, after 18 years of slavery, the zombies were freed. And this happened. There's really 2 different stories coming from a variety of these different zombies, right? By one account, one zombie got fairly upset with the Bokor and killed him. And that Bokor's spells over all the zombies was effectively broken, okay? And then the other one is that after the Bokor died, his widow came out and fed all of the zombies salt, and it was the salt that broke the curse. So, talking about that, we say oftentimes that sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and that would be kind of like the case of the zombie. Now, in American pop culture, we see things like the Day of the Dead, or I'm sorry, the Night of the Living Dead back in the 60s, you know, what we might consider to be one of the early zombies. But if you go back and you watch the original film, they weren't called zombies in that film at all. They were referred to as ghouls, right? So it wasn't until 1978 that the term zombie actually made it into Hollywood and therefore pulp culture. Conveniently, 2 years before Claverius's return from enslavement. And zombieism is morphed. You know, we see The Walking Dead, World War Z, Zombieland, so on and so forth. Some of these other depictions that I had given to you here, you know, significantly shifts from the origins of the legend. Right? These cinematic zombies, even they have differences in them, right? Some of them are biologically infected, right? Some type of germ, World War Z, for instance, caused zombieism. Others turn to zombies through, you know, contaminated bites. Some because they need to eat brains and so on and so forth. So moving on here, I got a couple other visuals up here that might be somewhat stimulating. In 17th century, okay, so back in the 1600s, Haiti, what current day Haiti and the Dominican Republic are, was known as San Dominique Island, all right? And it was a slave trading post, like a lot of the smaller Caribbean islands were at the time: Cuba, Jamaica, Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, so on and so forth. And so these slave trading posts, which were the forefront for the modern day Afro-Caribbean culture that we're familiar with now, was under mostly under some type of French control, right? French colonialism, as it were. And the French subjected the African slaves there to, you know, an incredible amount of misery and cruel practices. I saw lots of different depictions where, you know, they'd hang meat hooks through the ribs of slaves, and they, you know, whose hands and feet were bound, and they just, you know, twist on these huge meat hooks out in the open until they died, and, you know, people were beaten, and it was, there's some pretty significant counts, right? So the slaves began to come up with an idea, the Haitian slaves anyway, since we're talking about San Dominique Island, that dying would allow them to return back to, you know, the African motherland, which they called Longini, okay, Longini, which offered the hope of an afterlife free of the cruelty by the French. But it wasn't until the 17th, 18th century, okay, where, I'm sorry, however, during the 17th and 18th century, Haitian beliefs condemned that those who were to commit suicide would actually be confined to the Hispaniola plantations forever. Okay, so if a slave killed themselves, they were not leaving San Dominique Island and going back to Longini. They were going to stay there. And so those that did kill themselves turned into what we would consider to be an undead slave, all right, kind of reflecting the archetype of the original zombie, because they preyed on the French slave masters. Now, at the start of the 19th century, we had the Haitian Revolution, okay, which ended French colonialism. Now, instead of having suicide-induced zombies, the myth shifted just a little bit, and it fell under the umbrella of sorcery and voodoo. Now, voodoo is a combination of diasporic African religions and Roman Catholicism. And I know I talked about voodoo last year, but it created this creolized form of Afro-Caribbean religion, mostly centered in Haiti, but we see aspects of it in Jamaica, aspects of it in Brazil, aspects of it in New Orleans, right, in the French Creole areas. Where, according to these voodoo beliefs, the physical world is complemented by the spirit world. So the two kind of live together, right? And so we have spirits, we have mysteries, we have the invisibles, we have angels, we have the ancestors of the deceased ancestors of the people who are alive, right? And so the premise of voodoo then is something that's called Sevilla Law, okay, which means to serve the spirit. And this is the important part of this, is to understand is that through Sevilla Law, that when a person has died or has been killed, the Bokor, the witch doctors, can interrupt the natural migration of the spirit from the deceased into the spirit world. So, like Claverius was talking about, people who are, that migration is interrupted, they'll just kind of hang out with the body, all right? And it's not only Claverius that talks about this, it's other Haitians who have been quote unquote zombies as well. So the term zombie, okay, so what you see in the upper there, the NZONBI, okay, that's Haitian Creole for zombie, okay, comes from the African word, which I put in the bottom right of your screen there, in zombie, just literally means ghost. And so from a voodoo perspective, death is revered, all right, and it's considered to be the great transition from the living world into the afterworld. But some practitioners believe that the spirit, the person's spirit, Tibonan, I'm probably butchering it, right? The good little angel that lives in the body leaves the body, and then will kind of hover around there for about 7 days, and then it'll either go down to the dark waters or it'll go somewhere else, and it'll hang out there for 1 year and 1 day. Now, I just said hovers around the body for about 7 days, and Claverius talked about how he hung around his body for 8 days before he was resurrected. That 1 year and that 1 day period, though, the community will celebrate the death until the little angel, okay, is reclaimed, the soul, right? And some people can place it in a jar. They can take it down to a forest, for instance, and place it there and wait for its rebirth. The intersection, though, here is that during that year and that day, a Bokor or a sorcerer can capture the spirit of the dead, and they can sell it to other people. Okay, sometimes they sell it as good luck, sometimes they sell it for labor, whatever the case may be. However, there's a biological explanation for some of these things, all right? And I read some 2018 articles in molecular biology. And when we're talking about the sequence of programmed death, okay, when cells die, there's a particular process during cells' death, right, histology, that is evident later in advanced stages. But this article I read showed that when certain types of stressors, okay, that are causing the cell's death are removed, that the cells in the tissues can regenerate or recover from it, okay? Now, this hasn't been replicated in humans yet. We're using surrogates, but there are a lot of different types of drugs that will induce these types of scenarios, for lack of better words, okay? Now, the biggest one here is tetrodotoxins. And tetrodotoxins are abundant around Australia and throughout the Caribbean, okay? The most common place that we can get it here is from the puffer fish. Off the coast of Australia, we get it from the blue-ringed octopus, right? There are other things, other types of synthetics that produce these as well. K2 or spice is another thing that I want to talk about for a minute. But tetrodotoxins are a sodium channel blocker, which is very interesting. And this might have something to do with the fact that the Haitian zombies were actually fed a sodium-free diet. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, okay? And so that's just a hypothesis that I'm kind of playing with here at the moment. But these tetrodotoxins that we find, you know, in the Caribbean pufferfish, like I said, Australia's blue-ringed octopus, or in Japan, the fugu fish, right? If you're familiar with that, you'll hear that, you know, certain Japanese chefs will prepare this particular type of pufferfish, and they'll leave just enough of the poison in the fish, and they'll remove just the poison out, so that when a person eats it, you know, they get tinglings in their spines. They might have some, you know, weird thought processes, euphoria, things along these nature. But at the same time, you know, a lot of years people die from eating that stuff too, because this is such a potent poison. So when we look at the medical studies of the zombies, right, you know, we see some type of normal pattern. Zombies have very impulsive reactive aggression disorders. And oftentimes this is caused by, you know, orbital frontal loss of control of the brain, you know, ataxia, which is caused by a disease perhaps in the cerebellum, right? Hippocampal damage, you know, that prevents long-term memory consolidation. The language circuits can be destroyed. You know, there's reduced pain responses because of the somatosensory cortex is damaged. Degeneration in the posterior orbital cortices, you know, that causes an attention locking disorder. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these different things. So we have zombies, you know, that have been recognized, you know, like I said, by some of the leading journals in Haiti. But we also had a zombie outbreak in 2016 in the Bronx, in New York City. And this is interesting because this was a drug-induced zombie type of event, all right, where in this case it was K2 or spice that showed that a particular drug was able to cause significant effects on the central nervous system. So the Lancet is reported 3 different case studies in addition to Haiti, in addition to in addition to Clavarius, in addition to the zombie outbreak up in the Bronx. So I'm gonna just talk about that for a moment. There was a 30-year-old woman, an 18-year-old male, and a 31-year-old female. Okay, so 2 30-somethings and 1 teenager. And all 3 of these people reported that they died of some type of fever-related incident. Okay, so the 30-year-old died. 3 years later, she was found walking about all stiff and disjointed, like the zombies in the movies. Right, the 31-year-old woman died the same way. 13 years later, she reappeared, unable to speak. You know, the 18-year-old died of a fever as well. He was a male. You know, almost 2 years later, he reappeared. And now we're talking about, you know, advances in medicine and, of course, you know, the specter of zombieism. And they were studied quite a bit. And, you know, one of them was said to have catatonic schizophrenia, right, after she returned from the death. The other one had a learning disorder. You know, the other one had some type of brain syndrome. But in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology, and, you know, some studies of ethnobiology, you know, so on and so forth, of the Haitian zombie, most of the zombie potions or the things that the Bokors will give to people to enslave them were actually found to contain these Tetrado Toxins. I've been saying that word all day to make sure I get it out right. Here I am still messing it up, okay? It's all related to the Caribbean pufferfish. The zombie breakout in Brooklyn, there was 33 of them that were there. You know, they all had these synthetic cannabis derivatives, K2 spice, like I was talking about. Flocka is yet another synthetic drug that stimulates the release of dopamine, inhibits epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin reuptake. So if you're familiar with those at all, you start playing with those, we get different types of psychotic behaviors. Molly, right? Ecstasy, you may be familiar with, also can produce some of these zombie-like characteristics. Toxoplasmosis, right? Toxoplasma gondii. All pregnant women, if you've ever had a child, I'm sure you've been warned against toxoplasmosis. It's transmitted by cat scat, right? They tell you don't clean out a cat box. If you got one, have your husband, boyfriend, other kids do something with it, right? But a person who is infected with toxoplasmosis will see brain chemistry changes, personality changes they're very similar to Parkinson's disease or schizophrenia. And then we got the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, known as mad cow disease, right? There was an outbreak of that in Europe years ago, which produces very jerky movement, similar, to thematic zombies. But unlike the undead, they do end up dying, right? And even the CDC has prepared, you know, a plan to combat zombies as well. I wanted to point these guys out to you before I transition away from this. So these are two people that were either attacked by zombie-like behavior or suffered zombie-like behavior. Young woman in the upper left there had taken a synthetic cannabinoid, and while she was in church, heard God call out to her and told her to remove her own eyes. And so, to the horror of everybody that was in church, she just reached into her orbital sockets and just pulled her eyeballs out. Can't think of her name right now. But if you were to say, you know, just type in woman who pulled her eyes out in church, I'm sure you would be able to find her. You know, she's a fairly attractive young lady, and whose whole life's trajectory has been changed. Now, the fellow you see in the upper right-hand corner there, yeah, there's a picture of him where he's looking a little angry, and then another picture of him with no eyeballs and no nose. This is the famous Miami spice case, you know, 2016, 15, 14, 13, I don't remember. This is a homeless guy, and he was attacked by a younger fella who was jacked up on stuff, and the guy literally ate his face off. And so if you look in the middle picture there down towards the bottom, you see somebody who has literally had his face eaten off, all right? And I kind of, you know, keep getting drawn back to that eye there that's poking out, that right eye. You know, it kind of changes this guy's whole perspective a little bit. And then there's one last kind of zombie left, and that's what I call cell phone zombies. You know, I'm a professor, and I see these kids walking around all the time just doing this all day long, right? Not a clue what's in life. I don't know if that constitutes a real zombie or not, but I thought it was worth bringing up. All right, the other one I wanted to kind of touch on, I'm trying to get this done quickly. I don't know if I can, are vampires. Right. And so, you know, everybody's familiar with Bram Stoker. Everybody's familiar with the evolution of the vampire. Right. Over the years, you know, we've talked about vampirism as being the quickening of the dead. Right. I've seen it or read about it as a form of a virus, as a form of a spore. I've read pure vampires are spore born. You know, the bitten vampires are lesser, you know, that they're evil, that their blood's tainted, and so on and so forth. Well, I trace these back to Gothic lore. Right. And so the vampires were first introduced to us back in the 1800s. You know, Polidori's The Vampire was the seminal work that kind of put it out there. Penny Dreadful came, you know, about 40 years later. And then, of course, the mainstay, Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I put two of them up there, you know, the original Dracula and then Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula up there. A fun fact about the original Polidori piecework that introduced us to the vampire, there was a contest between him, a fellow named Lord Byron, who was a renowned poet, Percy Shelley, and Mary Shelley. You should know Mary Shelley because Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, right? And so there seemed to be this little clique of people that delved into the macabre that really, you know, how to get it to go. But there are two people that really seem to have given birth to the development of the vampire over the years. All right. We'll go back one slide. The first one is Vlad the Impaler. All right, depicted in the upper left-hand corner there. Vlad the Impaler was, you know, a king of Hungary, if you will. All right, and so you know, the origins of this are very different than, say, like Blade, okay? But there's commonalities to it too. Let me talk, you know, just take Blade for a moment. Blade has to bathe in blood. He's a vampire, if you're not familiar with him, Wesley Snipes, early 2000s. There was you know, three films that came about. You know, Blade had to bathe in blood because he wouldn't drink blood. That's how you would get healed, right? And that's even yet another kickback to Vlad the Impaler. The other one, you know, we'll talk about here in a minute, which is Elizabeth Batry. But Vlad the Impaler is kind of like the rightful deity to vampirism. In the mid 1500s, 15th century, so 14, whatever the case may be, Vlad rose to power during the Hungarian and the Romanian conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, which probably had something to do with a lot of his eccentric behaviors later on down the road. So Vlad and his brother were given as a pledge to the Ottoman Empire in order to secure his father's loyalty. Now, the Ottoman Empire was one of the largest, most powerful dynasties in the history of the world. It was an Islamic dynasty, nonetheless, but it was focused over, on the European fronts. So a particular Hungarian governor had invaded Romania and killed Vlad's father. Now, Vlad's father had been known as Vlad Dracul. All right, and so Vlad, this one, the Impaler, Vlad III, was also known as Vlad Dracul, right? Like Dracula, just no A on the end of it. And there was a bunch of conflict that ensued after that, right? And so Vlad developed this revenge streak, and he set out to do it. Now, at first, he was focused on Transylvanian Saxons, so probably the Germans, right, that were in the area at that time. But anybody else, even the Ottoman Sultan, had sent some convoys or envoys, to come to meet with Vlad. And so what Vlad do? He impaled every one of them. And there's different ways that he did it. You can stick a pike through the chest or stick a pike through the head. Either way, a person was mounted up in the sky. And so now, just something that I sewed together here. Vlad wanted to join forces with Hungary, so he went over to Hungary, and the Hungarian king captured him, held him for something like 12 or 13 years. This is interesting. If we go back to this slide here, Matthias Corvinus was the Hungarian king, and this guy up here between the werewolf and the other vampire is fiction from a movie called Underworld. There was 3 of those, Kate Beckinsale, and the wolf is William Corvinus, and this other guy over here is Marcus Corvinus, and the guy in the middle is Alexander Corvinus. They all share the same surname as the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, right? So we're seeing, still some throwbacks to these cultures. Anyway, 12 years later, Vlad gets out of prison and he begins to go around and starts impaling everybody again until he was killed on a battlefield. Pope Pius II, learned that Vlad had a penchant for blood, wrote a play. It was played to the Roman emperor. The German stories, remember the Saxons that were being murdered in Transylvania. Told where Vlad would get a big copper cauldron, and then he had a lid with a bunch of holes that were, made into it, and he would put people in the cauldron, and he put their heads in the holes, and then he would boil them alive, and so on and so forth. But he would also take babies, okay, and he would impale the babies while they were suckling with their mothers, and then the babies, they would sit there and fight because they were impaled, and while they were at their mother's breast. And then once the baby was dead, then he would cut the woman's breast off, and then he would stuff the babies inside head first, and then he would impale them again. So yeah, I mean, he was really, really crazy. He would, though, he developed a propensity to eat amongst those who were impaled and dead and dying. He would even dip his bread into their blood, giving rise to the common thing that, vampires need to have blood to eat. So, Elizabeth Batry is the other one I kind of want to talk about for a moment. Same time frame. She's of Hungary, where Matthias Corvinus was. She was a serial killer. She murdered about 650 virgin girls. Storied as a vampire, she would bleed out these girls. She would torture these girls. She would bathe in their blood to, preserve her youth. Historical records show there was about 300 witnesses to this. Some of these witnesses were dead, dying, or imprisoned virgin girls. Others were people of her staff, and so on and so forth. So there are a couple things I want to talk about cultural influences, and then I realize I'm getting close to running over my time, so I'll try to speed it up. Vampires, depending on the cultures, may have once been a witch. They could have been people that had rebelled against the Orthodox Church at some point in time while they were alive. There were ways to try to control these vampires. One of them was jamming a brick in their mouth so that they could not chew the way through the veil that was draped over their face. Others are putting bags of seeds or sand because there's some type of accounting compulsion that a vampire would have to stop and count all of the grains of sand that were in a bag, or so on and so forth. We see Chinese vampires, we see European vampires, South American vampires, vampires everywhere, Russian vampires. In traditional lore, though, how did you kill a vampire? Well, people will tell you. You stick a wooden stake through its heart, right? Well, that can be traced back to Vlad the Impaler's penchant for impaling people, right? Another one would be to burn a vampire, all right? And so burning vampires eventually gave light to, burning when they're out in the sunlight, right? Things like garlic, which has a high sulfur content, would go. These things are recurring, themes. In regards to ultraviolet or sunlight, I spent way more time than what I would care to admit reading on the quantum physics of light properties, and then trying to relate that to vampirism. But all light travels at the same speed, right? But the length of a light's wave, right? Say ultraviolet versus red, and any damage that it can impart to the undead is probably only something that can be discernible through black body radiation at a rate of temperatures, is what I concluded. And I said, well, central physics suggests that a vampire can somehow distinguish between light sources, is highly unlikely. So, that's a digression. The corpses of vampires, though, have a little bit of a more interesting twist that I think that we can relate to, is that if a person were to dig up the grave of a vampire, oftentimes they said that they were more plump, they weren't as shallow or caved in. There were little to no signs of decomposition on them, right? Sometimes they had flesh, sometimes they had fresh blood about their face. So let's look at the Black Plague in Europe for just a moment. People would oftentimes bury individuals, corpses, but not really, right? People who are still sick or dying, because of the fear that the Black Plague represented. And so, when a person is then buried, if they're still alive, they're still going to have these weeping pustules. They're still going to have the open wounds in amongst the mouth. We know, people hemorrhage blood through the mouth. Post-mortem movement could, just simply be, a person who's not yet dead, right? You've all heard the saying, for whom the bell tolls, right? Well, if you look back at Europe during the time of the Black Plague, a lot of times people were buried with a string by which they could ring a bell. If they ring in the bell, they're letting people know, hey, I'm not dead yet. You buried me, but I'm not dead yet, right? And so, digging up somebody who's not quite all the way dead, that could certainly be seen as taken into account as far as culture goes. My last little comment on modern day vampires, right, is that there are a sect of vampires that live throughout the world, right? I read an actual dissertation on vampires, a postdoctoral dissertation, chronicling vampires in New Orleans. Okay, so they belong to a group called the New Orleans Vampire Association. I thought they could come up with something a little bit better than that, but that's what it's called, NOVA. And these are people who claim to have some form of medical condition, no supernatural powers whatsoever, but that requires them to drink blood in order to live. So that got me curious. And so we learned that feeding is a drink blood, whether it's donated blood, whether, somebody just gives, hey, you can cut me and suck the blood out of me. so on and so forth. And they liken their movement to that of the homosexual movement, where a person has to be awakened to who they are. They have to come out as who they are. There's elder vampires that can help them transition, and so on and so forth. In the medical books, there's actually something that's termed as clinical vampirism, and it's known as Redfield Syndrome. And that's the impulsive drinking of blood, and it's incredibly rare. But yet even something like that still does exist, at least, you know. How do I stop doing this? Stop here. At least insofar as, you know, the treatment of it goes. So my point in all of this is, I hope I didn't bore all of y'all, but I hope you found it interesting. There is a historical biological context for zombies. There's a historical and somewhat biological context for vampirism. But when you go out trick-or-treating in the next day or two, you know, just kind of remember that it's been, you know, millennia of lore and millennia of stories and belief systems that all come together. So when we put on our capes and our fangs and whatnot and go out and go trick-or-treat, there's actually a reason for that. And hopefully you know what that is now. So.
Thank you, Lee.
Yes,
Did you have any questions? I know, Audrey, you had your hand raised for a second. Do you want to ask something? No? Maybe? Oh, there it comes in.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Yes. Okay, let me unmute you. Oh. Allowed to talk.
Let's see here.
Oh, I have to promote you to a panelist. That's okay.
Oh, there she comes.
You don't have to turn on your camera if you don't want to. Okay, you need to unmute yourself. There you are. Okay.
The whole world can see you.
I had a question about the vampires.
Can you talk louder, sweetie? I can't hear you.
I had a question about the vampires.
Okay. You have a question about vampires?
Yeah. So, like, was it a very, like, popular thing to become, like, a vampire? Or, like, would you have to do, like, something special or something like that?
She wants to know if it was a popular thing or... Go ahead.
Right. So yeah, the question is, and in its infancy, no, there was nothing popular about being a vampire. Matter of fact, if you were a vampire, you would find yourself burned or have a stake driven through your chest as well. Modern culture now, and we see this in different in different movies where being a vampire is glorified. You know, I can go back to what was that Tom Cruise movie with the vampire? Interview with a Vampire. Okay. And I think that kind of, you know, try to explain the story of a transitioning or awakened vampire trying to become something that, you know, and the romanticism that vampires have. You know, we've heard love stories being told about vampires. We've seen vampires idolized, but that's just Hollywood. Hollywood being Hollywood. You know, if you were a vampire of yesteryear, you would be burned to death or have a stake driven through you. Looks like we have some more over there too.
Yeah, I think Carolyn says she's been to Dracula's castle. She walked the path. That's creepy.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome. And then she said something about a Y pause.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Quite sure what that is. You know, and there's another thing too. You know, the Transylvanian, again, this is pop culture, but they always display, you know, the Romanian castle of Count Dracula, or Count Dracul, as being this dark, dingy place, and we see that carried over into pop culture. I know a movie that this young one's familiar with called Van Helsing, that, you know, where the vampire in Van Helsing lives in a very dark, dingy castle. You know, and I bet. What is her name? Carolyn, was it?
It's Carolyn.
Hamming. Carolyn Hamming. I bet she could tell you that was not the case at all. I mean, the castle's old, but I bet you it was out in the beautiful sunlight and everything else, you know. some of the ways that vampires have been, broadcasted is just.
Nope, she says she's slight and airy.
There we go. So, little validation there. Okay. Any other questions? I'm happy to stay here. Y'all should know me. I love these things.
Have you had any experiences with that, with coming across it in any of your detective work or anything?
No. As far as vampirism, no. I've done animal mutilations, and where people will say silly things sometimes about them, but no, nothing like that. Now, the zombies, though, let me take you back to about a year ago where whenever we did the 5 most interesting crime scenes, right? And I talked about Haitian altars in drug houses when we would do raids on the drug houses, and I wouldn't touch them because I'm not convinced, to be honest with y'all, not to sound like a kook or anything, but I'm not 100% convinced that science can say that a tetrodotoxin is actually the cause for things like this. There may be a mystic component to this, and I'm not willing to play with that. Okay.
Yeah, Brianna, I wanted to know if we could rewatch it. Always. I recorded all of these, so you can email me and I will share it with you later. We just launched our new website, so hopefully I'll be able to start posting them there or through YouTube through our new website. I do have all of them ready to go.
Outstanding.
Anybody?
I figured something like this, I'd have gotten a lot more questions, but yeah, everybody wants candy. I'm not going to get it. Usually my kids go trick-or-treat, and then you know what I do after they zonk out after all that candy sugar rush? Then it's daddy's turn to get the candy.
You can come out to the museum. We're doing night flights for our treat-or-treat, zip lining.
Oh, and on Friday night, Saturday night, or
Saturday
you know
night.
what? I'm gonna be in Georgia this weekend. I'm sorry.
Saturday
I'll have to find
night,
some little goblins and roll them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Roll them for their candy. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We will be on next week at same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Go ahead, Lee.
And Durham. We have your questions, Ann. I caught them at the very end.
Oh, they're there. Okay, yes.
Are you familiar with Paul Barber's Vampires, Burial, and Death? No, ma'am, I'm not. And so I'm suggesting by you putting that out there that it's something that I probably should read, and I'll take a look-see at that, absolutely. Thank you for turning me on to that.
Oh, no, I'm
Sounds
sorry.
like it's nonfiction by the title. Oh, see, I keep getting questions popping up down here.
That's great.
Oh, and there's nothing more. It said 5 now. Let me see. Answered.
Oh, I haven't dismissed the others.
Okay.
I dismissed them. Okay.
There we go. So go ahead with your closing, Lacey. I'll keep my mouth shut.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're going to be here next week. Some folks, scientists from the Mag Lab, will be talking about their work with asphalt binder and its toxicity. So not quite as entertaining as zombies and vampires, but important for the environment. So please join us next week. We will be sending out our email, and we will be staying with Zoom from now on. So yay, Zoom, and no more of the other guy. So
right.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody. Everybody be safe, be well. Oh, we have another question. Oh, Anne wants to know about the normal death and decomposition of mimicking a vampire. Oh, she said that's what the book's about.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know what? Okay, spooky story from Lee Bushong's annals. I was in a morgue one night, and I heard a groan, and then somebody farted, to use the technical term, while I was in the morgue. And I think that day I probably found religion because it scared the absolutely everything out of me. So yes, decomposition can mimic lots of different things. People will talk, they'll moan, they'll groan, they'll pass gas, their body will move. Sometimes a leg may raise, a leg may lower. You know, we've got a whole process that begins in the gut. The minute that a person dies, real layman's terms, the stomach, the lining of the stomach that holds all of that acid in there, right, breaks down. And it doesn't take a lot of time for the stomach acids to eat through that wall, and then it kind of, you know, just dumps into the abdominal cavity, which generates a whole bunch of things. Chiefly what we're looking at is, you know, it's a bacterial feeding frenzy, where, you know, we begin to get a lot of byproduct, hydrogen sulfide, for instance, butyric acid, things of these natures, which will cause the body to bloat, right? So if you ever wonder why people, you know, when they drown, you can't find them a day or two later, depending on temperature, some other factors, they pop up and float on the surface. It's because the generation of those gases on the inside, right? And so a person who's dead, you know, might have died like this, goes through rigor mortis, right, where the body seizes, and then after a period of time, the rigor goes away. But as the chest keeps expanding and expanding and expanding, it's not uncommon to have a limb fall. And if you're not prepared for that, that can be really unsettling. You know, like being in a morgue cooler, and you hear somebody going, oh, right? It's just air being forced past the vocal cords. The thing that makes them a human, the thing that quickens them, that's gone. This is just a byproduct of decomposition, and it's really interesting. And when you look at it, another aspect I might want to throw in there for just a moment, I'm not going to go into it tonight, but it is a disorder called necrophilia. Sometimes where people have prefer the company of dead people, for lack of better words. And you know, there's certain stories that surround that could possibly be confused with vampirism as well. So maybe I should have taken this another way and just talked about things like that. I like to blend science into the things that I do so people understand. But, you know, any feedback that you guys have, you know, drop it to Lacey, please. You see her email address in the comment section over there. You know, I really try to structure these things for the audience. And, you know, if you'd like to hear something one day, kick it over to her. I'll do something on it, right? And it doesn't all have to be science-y based. You know, we can do something fun too. So it's whatever y'all want.
That's right. We do kind of everything. We say it relates to the mission, but as long as it's science or history, we're following in our mission. So as long as it's educational and outreach for adults, because, you know, right now, adults aren't getting a whole lot of outreach. So nobody's getting a whole lot of outreach. So.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's see. One last chance. Any questions?
Chance.
Okay.
Nope.
We'll have to do this again, Lacey.
Yes, of course. Once you get better.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
righty.
Take care, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.